The conference room smelled faintly of leather and old wood polish. Heavy curtains shut out the daylight, muting the space into shadows. A long mahogany table stretched between me and a dozen faces I didn't know, relatives of a man I had cared for in his final months. Their whispers scraped like sandpaper in the quiet, a chorus of greed and expectation. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was just the nurse. Charles Hill, the lawyer, adjusted his spectacles, his voice low and deliberate. I, Theodore James Spears, being of sound mind and body. The words rolled out calm as waves. Small bequests to staff members, Miss Clark, the housekeeper, Mr. Allen, the driver, Mrs. Linetti, the cook. Nods, murmurs, restrained gratitude. Then the room stiffened. And now, regarding the bulk of my estate, valued at approximately $12 million, a hush fell so complete that the ticking wall clock sounded like gunfire. I leave my entire remaining fortune, including all properties, investments, and assets, to my beloved niece, Elizabeth Harris. The room exploded. Chairs scraped. Voices rose like snarling dogs. A red-faced cousin slammed his fist on the table. A woman gasped as if the air had been stolen from her lungs. And me? Madison Harris, nurse, outsider. I reached for my bag. This wasn't my fight. I was halfway to the door when Charles Hill's voice cut through the chaos. Miss Harris, what is your full legal name? I froze. The shouting dulled into a strange, muffled silence. Dozens of eyes stabbed into me, suspicion sharpening the air. Madison Harris, I managed. My throat felt tight. Your middle name, please. I frowned, confused. Elizabeth. Madison Elizabeth Harris. The floor tilted under me. I gripped the door frame to keep from swaying. Gasps rippled across the table. Robert, the red-faced cousin, barked. This is a trick. She's just the nurse. He met her months ago. But Charles Hill ignored him. His gaze stayed locked on me, steady, unyielding. Miss Harris, what was your mother's maiden name? My pulse hammered in my ears. Jones. Elizabeth Jones. And your grandmother? The name slipped out before I could think about it, my voice breaking around it. Willow. Willow Spears. The room collapsed into silence again, but this time it wasn't chaos. It was revelation. Charles Hill nodded slowly, almost tenderly, as if confirming something long suspected. Then, Miss Harris, you are not only his nurse. You are Theodore Spears' niece. The words landed like a blade, splitting my world open. 6 months earlier, I had stood at the iron gates of the Spears mansion, a borrowed nurse's bag digging into my shoulder. Rain misted down, clinging to my coat, making the estate loom even larger and more forbidding. Inside, Mrs. Clark, the housekeeper, let me down echoing corridors lined with oil portraits, stern faces of men and women staring as though they judged me for daring to breathe their air. He's in his study, she said curtly. He's having a bad day. When I stepped inside, Theodore Spears was framed by a tall window, his frail body hunched in a leathered wheelchair. His hands trembled faintly on the armrests, but his eyes, those eyes were steel. Another one, he said flatly, before I could even introduce myself. His voice was sharp, dismissive. How long do you think you'll last? I sat down across from him, leveling my gaze with his. That depends. How long do you think you'll need a nurse? For a heartbeat, silence, then an unexpected flicker at the corner of his mouth, almost a smile. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less. Pancreatic cancer, pain management, waiting for the inevitable. That's all that's left. My chest tightened. I'm sorry, that must be frightening. Frightening? He barked a laugh, bitter and hollow. Young lady, I've lived 78 years, built an empire, made more money than I could ever spend. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of dying alone. Forgotten. His words sat heavy between us like smoke in the study. What about your family? I asked softly. He snorted. What family? A pack of vultures who circle only when they smell blood or money. They'll be here when I'm gone, fighting over scraps. His gaze pierced me, testing. So tell me, Miss Harris, are you here to steal from me, flatter me, or actually help me? I swallowed, feeling the weight of his stare. I'm here to take care of you, whatever that looks like. Something shifted in his eyes then. Not trust, not yet, but the faintest lowering of the drawbridge. We'll see, he muttered. We'll see.
The first week was a gauntlet. Every task felt like a test, measured, judged, dismissed. If I brought his medication at 9, he demanded it at 8:30. If I wheeled him into the garden, he complained the air was too damp. Once, when I reminded him to eat, he shoved the tray off the table. The porcelain shattered, soup dripping down the bookshelves like a slow, sticky wound. Fire me, I snapped, heart pounding, knuckles white around the chair handles. His eyes glinted with challenge. Most do it themselves. 3 weeks, that's the record. Think you can beat it? I didn't answer. I just cleaned the mess piece by piece, refusing to look away. By the second week, I realized his cruelty wasn't aimless. It was armor. He'd been disappointed so many times that he tested everyone, pushed, prodded, waiting to see who would break. One morning, I found him in the study with an open book on his lap, staring blankly at the words. His hands trembled too much to turn the page. Need help? I asked. His jaw tightened. Pride bristled. I can manage. I sat across from him and began to read aloud, without waiting for permission. My voice filled the silence. The Old Man and the Sea. At first, he scowled, but his eyes betrayed him, tracking every word, softening, caught. When I paused at the end of the chapter, he muttered, almost grudging, "You read well." That was the first crack in the walls. He began asking questions about my shifts at the hospital, about my tiny apartment with its peeling paint, about how I survived on cheap takeout and instant coffee. "You seem happy," he observed one day, despite not having much. I shrugged. "I have enough. I have people who care about me, work that matters. That's more than a lot of rich people can say." He chuckled dryly, a sound that wasn't quite bitter this time. Gradually, he let me glimpse his world. He spoke of his childhood during the Depression, of shoes with holes, of nights he went to bed hungry. He told me how he clawed his way into wealth, risking everything on ventures when failure meant ruin. But when I asked about his family, his voice turned acid. Relatives who call only when they need money. Friends who vanish when you're no longer strong. Blood doesn't make loyalty. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that family could mean something else, but the pain in his eyes kept me quiet. One afternoon, while adjusting his pillows, he asked, casually, "Your mother, what was her maiden name?" Jones, I said, surprised. Elizabeth Jones. He nodded, thoughtful, then pressed further. And her mother. I hesitated. The name tasted strange on my tongue. Willow. Willow Spears. She died before I was born. His fingers stilled on the armrest. He studied me so intently that the hair rose on the back of my neck. But then he looked away, mumbling something about needing rest. I didn't think of it again until much later. As his health declined, so did the mask. I began to see the man beneath the wealth. Intelligent, witty, occasionally even tender. He teased me about my stubborn streak. He listened to me rant about arrogant surgeons at the hospital. Sometimes, in rare moments, he laughed. A deep, rusty laugh that seemed to surprise even him. "Money can buy almost everything," he said once, his gaze fixed on the fire. "But not people who give a damn when you're weak." I didn't know what to say, so I just sat beside him in silence. That was enough. But not everyone who came to the mansion cared for him the way I did. A woman visited twice. Elegant, expensively dressed, her perfume lingering in the halls after she left. I never saw her face, only heard the raised voices behind closed doors. On those days, Theodore was always worse. Sharper. Angrier. Once, he shouted at me for breathing too loudly. Another time, he refused food altogether. I assumed she was a relative, someone after his money. But I daren't ask. One evening, the rain hammered the windows, and Theodore was restless, pacing his wheelchair like a trapped animal. "They're waiting," he growled, "waiting for me to die." "Who?" He looked at me, eyes burning with something raw. "The vultures. Family who never called, never cared, but now they hover." "You still have choices," I said gently. "You can decide what your legacy is." He stared at me, unblinking. For so long I thought I crossed a line. Then his face softened, just slightly. "You really believe that, don't you?" "Yes." A silence stretched, heavy and strange. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "Maybe there's hope after all." That night, as I drove home through the storm, I couldn't shake the look in his eyes. Something had shifted, something I couldn't yet name. But I had no idea just how much my life was about to change. The days grew shorter. Winter seeped into the mansion, making its marble floors colder, its rooms heavier with silence. Theodore's health unraveled quickly. His hands shook more, his voice slurred under the weight of medication. Yet his eyes, those sharp, unyielding eyes, seemed only to burn brighter. He grew secretive. Phone calls behind closed doors, meetings with his lawyer that stretched for hours. When I asked, he waved me away with the same phrase every time. "I'm making arrangements." Arrangements for what? He never said. One afternoon, he insisted I wheel him into the garden despite the chill. The air smelled of wet earth and dying leaves. The skeletal branches clawed at the sky as if begging for light. He looked frailer than ever, wrapped in a thick blanket, but his grip on my hand was fierce. "Madison," he said, using my first name, something he rarely did. "Yes?" "These months with you, they've been the happiest I've had in years." His voice broke on the word years, like it carried the weight of all the ones before. "Ted," I began. "Theodore," he corrected gently. Then softer, "No, call me Theodore." A silence hung between us, fragile as glass. "You've shown me kindness when I gave you every reason not to," he went on. "You've reminded me there are good people in the world. Don't ever lose that. Don't let money or grief or revelations change who you are." I frowned. "What revelations?" His eyes glistened, but he only shook his head. "Promise me, Madison. Promise me you'll stay true to yourself." "I promise," I whispered, though I didn't understand. He squeezed my hand once, then leaned back in his chair, exhausted. 3 days later, Theodore Spears was dead. The funeral was small, too small for a man of his stature. A scattering of business associates in dark suits, distant relatives in designer black, their eyes darting, calculating. Not grief, anticipation. I sat near the back, hands folded in my lap, a stranger among people who hadn't seen Theodore in years. Their whispers carried. Wonder how much he left behind. Bet the vultures are sharpening their claws already. I hated them for it. When the service ended, I rose quietly, ready to slip away unnoticed. That's when Charles Hill appeared at my side, his umbrella shielding me from the drizzle outside. "Miss Harris," he said, "Mr. Spears requested your presence at the reading of his will. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, my office." I stared at him. "I'm just his nurse. I don't belong there." "You do," he said firmly. His eyes held no doubt. He insisted. The next afternoon, the lawyer's office was crowded, suffocating with perfume and cologne and greed. Theodore's relatives had come out of hiding, every one of them suddenly eager to claim a piece of him. I sat at the edge of the room, wishing I could disappear into the leather chair. The weight of their stares was heavy. Curiosity, suspicion, disdain. Charles Hill began reading. Gifts to charities, modest sums to staff, tokens to old friends. I felt a flicker of relief when my name wasn't among them. I wasn't expecting anything. I didn't want anything. Then came the silence, the kind that stretches so taut it threatens to snap. The remainder of my estate, valued at approximately $12 million, I leave to my beloved niece, Elizabeth Harris. The room erupted. Accusations flew, voices overlapped, chaos roared. I shrank in my chair, heart hammering. I had no place here. I rose, reaching for my bag. If I left quietly, maybe no one would even notice. "Miss Harris," Charles's voice cut through the uproar. "What is your full legal name?" My breath stalled. Dozens of faces turned toward me like predators scenting blood. "Madison Harris," I stammered. "Middle name?" "Elizabeth. Madison Elizabeth Harris." The air shifted, stunned, electric. Charles leaned forward. His next question was calm, deliberate. "Your mother's maiden name?" I blinked. "Jones. Elizabeth Jones." "And your grandmother?" The name caught in my throat, fragile and buried. I hadn't spoken it in years. "Willow. Willow Spears." The silence that followed was absolute. No whispers, no protest. Just the sound of my own heart crashing in my chest. Charles's eyes softened. "Then you are exactly where you belong, Miss Harris. Theodore Spears's only true niece." The floor tilted. I gripped the table's edge, my vision tunneling. "That's impossible," I whispered. "My mother never... She said our family was gone. She never told me." "She and Theodore had a falling out long ago," Charles said gently. "But he never stopped looking. When he saw your photograph from the nursing agency, he recognized you instantly. You are the image of your grandmother." From across the table, Robert, red-faced, furious, exploded. "This is nonsense. She manipulated him. She's just a nurse who wormed her way in." Charles didn't flinch. Theodore anticipated this. He recorded everything, his meetings, his reasoning. He even commissioned DNA tests. The evidence is irrefutable. My knees weakened. I sank into the chair, the room spinning. DNA tests, recordings, months of secrets I hadn't known. Theodore hadn't just been my patient. He had been testing me, watching me, preparing me. Charles opened a sealed envelope. "Your uncle left you a letter." The words blurred as he began reading. "My dearest Elizabeth, though I know you prefer Madison." My throat tightened. Theodore's voice echoed in my memory, whispering in the garden, "Don't let revelations change who you are." And now, the revelation had come. The man I thought I was caring for in his final months was family, and he had left me everything. Charles Hill slid the sealed envelope across the table. The cream paper looked ordinary, but my hands trembled as I touched it. My name was written in Theodore's neat, slanted handwriting. Madison Elizabeth Harris. I unfolded it slowly. The room leaned in, greedy relatives straining to listen, eyes sharp as knives. Charles cleared his throat and began to read aloud. "My dearest Elizabeth, though I know you prefer Madison." My chest tightened. Hearing my uncle's words in the quiet room felt like he had reached back from beyond the grave to speak directly to me. "I didn't have the chance to reconnect with your mother. I regret that deeply. But I want you to know how proud I am of you. You are the woman I always hoped our family would raise. Strong, kind, unshaken by greed. You have proven it, Madison. You cared for me when you had no reason to. You treated me with dignity when others treated me as nothing more than a sick old man with money." I blinked hard, tears gathering. "I know this inheritance will come as a shock. I know you will have questions about why your mother never spoke of me, why I did not find you sooner. The truth is, pride and stubbornness broke our family apart. Willow thought me cold, greedy. I thought her naive. We both clung to our judgments and let time slip away. But watching you, seeing your compassion, I know she raised you with the values that matter most." A murmur rippled across the table. One of the cousins hissed, "Manipulation." Another scoffed loudly, but Charles read on. "This fortune, Madison, is not a prize. It is a responsibility. You once told me you dreamed of opening a free clinic, of helping those who could not help themselves. Now you can. My money will be your tool. Use it wisely. Use it to heal. Use it to love." The tears spilled over now, streaking hot down my face. "Most of all, know this. You were loved. You mattered. In my final months, you gave me more than comfort. You gave me family. You gave me peace. That is why I leave everything to you. Not because of blood, but because of who you are." By the time Charles reached the end, "Make me proud, with all my love, your Uncle Theodore," I could barely breathe. Silence. Then chaos. "You expect us to accept this?" Robert shot to his feet, face purple. "She tricked him. She's a nurse, an opportunist." "She stole our inheritance," a woman shrieked, bracelets jangling as she slammed her hand on the table. The room erupted, voices shouting, chairs scraping, fists pounding. The air thickened with fury. Charles raised his hand calmly. Theodore anticipated this reaction. He left video recordings of his decisions. He documented everything. He also compared Madison with another supposed niece, Elizabeth Carver, who many of you know was pressuring him for money. The contrast was undeniable. My head snapped up. Another Elizabeth? The elegant visitor I'd never seen clearly. The raised voices behind closed doors. Suddenly, it made sense. Charles continued, "You may contest the will. You're free to try, but I assure you the evidence is ironclad." The relatives seethed, but no one dared answer. I sat frozen, my heart racing. The words of Theodore's letter echoed inside me. This fortune is not a prize, it is a responsibility. After the others stormed out, angry threats still spilling from their lips, Charles guided me into his private office. The storm of voices outside dimmed as the door closed. "You must be overwhelmed," he said gently. "That's one word for it," I whispered. My fingers twisted together, knuckles white. $12 million. A mansion. Investments. I don't even know where to start. He gave a small, knowing smile. Start by breathing. Then, by remembering who you are. Theodore trusted you because you didn't let money define you. Don't start now. I swallowed hard. What am I supposed to do with all of this? Whatever you believe he would have wanted, Charles said simply. He believed in your vision, Madison. He told me himself, you were the only person he'd met in decades who cared more about people than about wealth. His words should have comforted me. Instead, they felt like chains of fire wrapping around my chest. Responsibility, legacy, family. I was just a nurse. How could I carry all of this? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my cramped apartment, staring at the ceiling, my mind unraveling. Theodore's voice haunted me. Don't let revelations change who you are. But how could they not? I wasn't just Madison anymore. I was Elizabeth, too. A Spears. An heiress. I pressed my palms against my eyes until stars burst in the darkness. When dawn came, I knew one thing. Nothing about my life would ever be the same. Days blurred into a whirlwind of decisions. Lawyers, bankers, appraisers, every choice weighed with Theodore's ghost. I visited the mansion again, this time not as a nurse, but as its owner. Walking those echoing corridors was surreal. The oil portraits of stern ancestors seemed to follow me with their eyes, silently asking, "Are you worthy?" In the study, behind the Shakespeare collection, I found the photo album Theodore had mentioned in his letter. The leather cracked beneath my fingers as I opened it. There was my mother as a child, grinning with missing teeth. My grandmother, Willow, radiant, her arm around a younger Theodore. Photos of a family I never knew I had, a life erased by silence and pride. One picture made me gasp. My grandmother as a teenager, light eyes, dark hair, a mischievous grin. She looked exactly like me. I traced her face with trembling fingers. For the first time in years, I felt less alone. But not everyone wanted me to have this new life. The calls started within a week. Anonymous numbers, voices thick with menace. You don't deserve it. You'll pay for stealing what's ours. One night, I returned home to find my apartment door scratched, the lock mangled. Nothing stolen, but the message was clear. The vultures weren't finished. Yet, even through the fear, something inside me hardened. I thought of the patients I'd seen at the hospital, families choosing between medicine and rent, children without vaccines, mothers dying from treatable illnesses. And I thought of Theodore, gripping my hand in the garden, begging me not to lose myself. That was my answer. If they wanted to call me a thief, let them. I would prove them wrong. I would make Theodore proud. Every success felt like a victory against the shadows Theodore had feared, against loneliness, greed, emptiness. But each step forward also painted a bigger target on my back. Lawsuits dragged through courts, reporters camped outside my gates. Strangers sent letters filled with venom. One night, as I locked up the clinic, I found a single envelope taped to the door. No return address. Inside, a scrap of paper with 5 words written in block letters. You don't deserve his name. My blood ran cold. For a moment, doubt suffocated me. Maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't worthy of being a Spears. Then I remembered Theodore's voice. Don't let revelations change who you are. And I knew I wasn't doing this for the name or the money. I was doing this for the people walking through those doors, and for the man who had trusted me to carry his legacy. But deep down, I also knew the battle wasn't over. It was only beginning. The hearing room was windowless and too bright, a sterile box humming with air vents and anger. Robert sat across from me with his lawyers, smug in a navy suit that stranged at the buttons. Beside him, a woman in a cream coat stared at her reflection in a compact mirror, fixing a smear of lipstick with the same care you might use to polish a knife. "Miss Carver," Charles murmured at my shoulder. "The other Elizabeth." She closed the compact with a click and met my eyes. "Congratulations," she said coolly. "You won the lottery." "I didn't buy a ticket." She smiled without warmth. "Everyone does." The judge entered, robes whispering. We stood, sat, and the room shifted from quiet menace to procedural war. Robert's counsel began with venom disguised as rhetoric. I was a schemer, a manipulator, a nurse who had seduced a dying man's loneliness and captured his pen. Every sentence was a hook baited for outrage. Charles waited, patient as stone. When it was our turn, he asked for the recordings. The screen flickered to life. Theodore appeared in the study, thinner than I remembered, and sharp as ever. He spoke to the camera, timestamp glowing in the corner. Today, Miss Carver insisted I add her as a joint owner to several accounts. When I declined, she called me cruel and said I owed her for the family name. The video cut. Another began. Elizabeth Carver in the doorway, chin lifted, voice honeyed and hot. "You'll die soon, uncle. Isn't it better your money stays with blood than strangers?" The camera angle widened, catching me at the far edge of the frame, entering with a tray. I set it down, said nothing, began arranging pills as if I could reorder the world. The clip ended. Another began. Longer. Quieter. Theodore spoke alone. "To whoever must hear this, I choose Madison because she chose me when there was nothing to gain. If you doubt my mind, listen to my reasons. If you doubt her motives, watch her behavior." Then the DNA report projected under the judge's light. Probability of relatedness, avuncular, 98.8%. Willow's name threaded through it like a ghost. The judge's gavel came down softly once. The will stands. Robert exhaled rage. Elizabeth's mouth tightened. The lawyers shuffled papers in the universal language of defeat. Charles closed his binder and touched my elbow. "It's done." Outside, the corridor smelled faintly of paper and old coffee. Reporters waited near the elevators. Before they could surge, a voice cut cleanly through the murmur. "You lied to him," Elizabeth said, stepping close. Her perfume was cold, like citrus and rain. "You played the saint for a payout. I spent years cultivating him, and you? I changed his dressings. I held the basin when he was sick. I told him the bad nights would end, and when they didn't, I stayed anyway. If that's a game to you, I'm glad you lost." For a second, something cracked in her gaze. Envy or grief? I couldn't tell. She lifted her chin. "Enjoy your charity. Eventually, the money runs out." "Maybe, but kindness doesn't." She turned away. The elevator swallowed her whole. The clinic breathed like a living thing now. Mornings began with the soft thunder of footsteps and stroller wheels, with the rustle of charts and the low murmur of 20 dozen languages that all meant the same thing: help. Our waiting room, once a ballroom, glowed in the washed gold of early sun. Nurses called names. Children chased the light. We added a small pharmacy with shelves of inhalers and antibiotics and prenatal vitamins. We added a counseling office with chairs that didn't squeak and a box of tissues tucked not too obviously into every corner. We added a small kitchen where volunteers brewed tea strong enough to steady hands. On Tuesdays, an old man came for blood pressure checks and stayed to tell war stories that bent time. On Thursdays, a teenager folded her sleeves to show clean skin where scars had once curled like vines. On Fridays, a new mother fell asleep in the lactation room, and no one woke her for an hour. Mrs. Clark walked the halls with a clipboard and a purpose that made her look taller. Mr. Spears would fuss about the scuff on that baseboard, she'd say, then smiled to herself as if hearing an answer. One afternoon, she found me in the study-turned-office, elbows deep in grant applications. She placed a small velvet box on my desk. "We found it behind the false panel in the top drawer. It's marked for you." Inside lay a simple ring, platinum, slim, a thread of diamonds no bigger than crumbs. Tucked beneath it, a note in Theodore's cramped hand. "Madison, for the days you forget you're allowed to keep something beautiful for yourself." I slipped it on and watched the light catch. For the first time since the will, I let myself want something purely because it was beautiful. Then I stood, straightened my shoulders, and went back to budgeting immunizations. The clinic's first crisis came with sirens and smoke. We were mid-triage. 3 wheezing kids, a sprained wrist, a woman with chest pain that wasn't cardiac but felt like it, when the alarm screamed. The scent hit next. Acrid, plastic. Wrong. "Evacuate!" I shouted. Training took over. We moved bodies and charts and oxygen like a machine built for storms. In the service hall, behind the stairwell, someone had stuffed a trash can with oily rags and a lit cigarette, a timed malice that loved the dark. By the time the firefighters doused it, the damage was contained to a corridor and a storage room. But the message was bigger than the scorch. Leave! Robert's handwriting didn't need to be on the wall to be understood. That night, I swept ash from the entry mat with a small handbrush and thought of my mother. I heard her, patient and tired, teaching me to clean messes we hadn't made. Charles came by and rolled up shirt sleeves. "Insurance will cover the repairs. Security cameras are on order. I'm sorry." I looked up. "Don't be. Some people will always want the house empty." He studied me for a long moment. "Does this make you want to stop?" "It makes me want to paint," I said. "Bright. Stubborn." We opened again 3 days later. The waiting room filled. Someone brought pastries, someone else brought a folded note that read, "Thank you for not giving up. It wasn't signed. It didn't have to be." On the anniversary of Theodore's death, we held a quiet ceremony in the garden. The winter roses had been coaxed into bloom by a groundskeeper who believed in gentle arguments with stubborn plants. A string quartet from the local high school played Bach with earnest concentration. Patients stood in clusters, awkward at first, then warm. I told them about a man who had been difficult because he'd been disappointed, who had learned in the last months of his life that love was louder than money when you're willing to listen. When I finished, a little girl tugged my sleeve. "Miss," she whispered, "who is he to you?" "Family," I said. She nodded solemnly, as if confirming a private theorem. After the crowd thinned, I went inside to the office and pulled down the photo album. Willow and Teddy on the cover, their smiles a dare against time. There was one picture I hadn't framed yet. Theodore at 20, standing beside his sister at a bus stop, both of them grinning into a wind that must have been cold. On the back, in Willow's looping hand, "We leave, we return, we forgive." I set the photo on the desk and wrote a letter I should have written months ago. "Dear Mom, I found him. Or maybe he found me. His name is Theodore, and he is stubborn and funny and wrong about many things, but right about what matters. I wish you could have seen us the day the clinic opened. I wish you could have told me whether forgiveness is a door you unlock once or a floor you mop every morning. I'm trying to do both. I hope you would be proud. I hope you know I kept your name and found my own." I didn't know where to send it. So I slid it into the album between Willow's smile and Theodore's shadow, and called that enough. Spring arrived like a held breath released. The clinic planted a community garden along the back wall. Mint, tomatoes, peppers, a row of stubborn sunflowers that turned their faces without apology. We started a scholarship for nursing students who had decided to choose people over prestige. We partnered with a shelter to run weekend immunization drives. One evening, I lingered after closing. The building settled around me, comfortable as an old sweater. In the foyer, the sunlight slanted through high windows, turning dust to confetti. I ran my hand along the banister that had once led guests to chandeliers and now led parents to checkups, and I thought, this is what money can look like when it remembers where it came from. There was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Clark popped her head in. "A visitor," she said, expression unreadable, "says she only needs a moment." Elizabeth Carver stood on the threshold, backlit by gold. No entourage, no perfume storm. Just a woman with tired eyes and a folded piece of paper in her hand. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "Then come in," I answered. She stepped over and looked around, taking in the converted ballroom, the hum of distant machines, the wall of children's drawings, a crooked house, a sun too big, stick figures holding hands. "He would have liked this," she said, after a long silence. "Yes." She handed me the paper, a receipt, a donation to the scholarship fund, in memory of her mother, a nurse I'd never heard of. "I was angry," she said simply. "Maybe at you. Mostly at myself. I thought I could buy a place in a story I hadn't earned." She swallowed. "I'm trying to do something that isn't about me." For a moment we stood in the soft noise of the building, two women who had circled the same man for different reasons and were now, somehow, facing in the same direction. "Thank you," I said. She nodded once and left, light as closing punctuation. That night, I locked up and paused at the study door. The ring Theodore left me flashed in the lamplight. I turned it, thinking of all the things I had been: a nurse in cheap sneakers, a granddaughter I never knew I could be, a woman with a fortune that felt like a dare. In the quiet, I heard him again, dry, amused, tender. "Don't let revelations change who you are." "I won't," I told the empty room, "but I'll let them make me bigger." I stepped into the hallway, past the portraits that no longer judged, toward the front doors where, in the morning, a line would form, not of vultures, but of neighbors. When I opened them to the night, the air smelled like rain and cut grass, like something ending and beginning at the same time. I stood on the steps of a mansion that had become a clinic, wearing a name I hadn't asked for and a purpose I'd chosen. Madison, Elizabeth, Harris, Spears. The names didn't cancel each other out. They harmonized. Legacy, I realized, isn't what we inherit. It's the work we refuse to abandon. It's the door we keep unlocking. It's the garden we plant where someone else once built a wall. I turned off the lights, set the alarm, and walked into the dark that wasn't frightening anymore. Tomorrow they would come, and we would be ready.